This is a message to all my supporters of this podcast. I'm introducing a new supporters program. You can contribute a small amount as a one-off payment to show your love for this podcast. Thank you in advance for all your contributions. I just wanted to let you know before we start the podcast that I am doing an online podcast course, how to be able to create, get your guests, scale it and monetize it. So please do go to abmpodcastcourse.co.uk and go into the contact us bit. I'm looking for new people to be able to be a podcast creator and really to be able to develop their skills and knowledge into a podcast. So as I said, go to abmpodcastcourse.co.uk and sign up. Thanks. This is the Absolute Business Mindset podcast, created and hosted by Mark Hayward. I'm a corporate employee with an entrepreneurial mindset. This podcast will help and support you with new ideas about business. These are my thoughts, ideas, and comments. Today, we've got George McGehrin back into part 2. So it's been fantastic, George. Thank you for coming back onto my podcast.
Mark, I appreciate being back. I've been on a lot of podcasts, as I mentioned before, right? But it's always fun to, it's always fun to talk to you over and over. So it's and I'm always, not that I'm worried about your questions, but I'm always intrigued by the way you get information from people. So I appreciate you having me on again.
Thank you. Don't worry. There's no hidden question. There's and hopefully you haven't got podcast fatigue either.
No, I have so much energy that I can go on, right? But it's probably it's probably a condition, right? Somebody will claim that they're unable to work because of some sort of video Zoom fatigue, right?
Yes.
As a disability.
All right, George. Right, we're going to talk about networking versus hustling. It was something that was inspired by the last time we spoke, and so I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into it. We're going to talk about various ways of different types of networking versus hustling. So one of the things that came up that you were in the top 30 most connected recruiter in the US. So that obviously is based on networking. So just tell me how you got to that stage of notoriety.
Right. So this was I think the first thing was I recognized an opportunity before it really. I mean, I've been on LinkedIn, for example, to give an example, since 2005. Right. Yeah. So I think LinkedIn started to get hot in 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
So in 2005, I recognized that, and so I started very, very early. But I think the first piece is you have to recognize opportunity before others do. With just basic tools. And there were a lot of different other marketing tools out there. But I noticed that LinkedIn, for example, at the time was getting tons and tons of funding, right? When they were with the some of the investments. And that's when I decided to kind of go all in with the LinkedIn piece in 2005. So that's part of it. The second thing is I very rarely, and even like you and I had spoken, right? After the call first time, the first thing I do is I always recommend that, people to you, but I also ask for referrals, right? So for literally 20 years, I've literally been asking people for referrals and referring others. And you do that enough and, you build up a pretty decent base of a network.
And were there, so you talked about LinkedIn, which I think we all now appreciate in the last maybe 2 or 3 years, the organic growth is amazing that you can get on LinkedIn versus Facebook, which was like that maybe 4 or 5 years ago. When you see those opportunities, how do you? Is there something in your thought process that sees an opportunity and seizes it? Is there something, a technique that you use? Do you keep up to date with across the board of different platforms? Like, what sort of tactics do you use when you're looking for opportunities?
I look at funding, right? I mean, it's like kind of like follow the money, right? You can there's so much information now with press releases and websites. You can see if a company, for example, is at least in the company standpoint, a Series A, Series B, C, right, and what level they're at. So I look at the funding. That's a I guess a strategy is a pretty good way to know if there's growth. So let's say that you're a salesperson, or let's say that you're an entrepreneur and you're looking for new clients. The funding is always an interesting way to get, or at least to go after a new group, because usually with funding, when they get the funding, what do they do, right? They take the money and they spend it. Yeah. So I look at the funding part of it. The second thing is, sometimes some of these groups are when you look at the numbers of just the number of the actual investment, it makes you question, like, what's going on here? Something's going on that no one else has really figured out. So I look at that, right? And the next thing I look at is if you see it over and over and over, like you get the same question over and over and over, then I look at that piece as well. This is just an interesting, one of our recruiting clients is, have you seen the, do you know who the Impossible Burger is? Have you seen, and Beyond Meats, and do you know that?
Oh, yes, yeah.
So I'd seen, I was just watching tons and tons of YouTube content. I saw all this sort of plant-based. It was just, I noticed a lot of that, and then you see it in the stores, and then you start. There just seemed to be a trend, right? So we approached, for example, Beyond Meat like many moons ago, before people even knew. This is before they had landed any sort of contracts, and they also got sort of interesting funding, right? So you need to be open to seeing those kind of opportunities. I think maybe it's an instinctual thing, but the easy thing, if you just want to keep it sort of very scientific, just stay where the funding is, and that usually tells you what's going on. The other thing is, it's like, like if you see the normal trend of, it's I guess the one negative you can say, you see a lot of these things like Facebook and Instagram or even TikTok, it's where the younger people are, right? And you see those things do well, and then eventually the older people catch on. Yeah. LinkedIn hasn't really followed that trend, right? But I just, people are always thinking about networking, right? And networking, and Facebook lets you network, and LinkedIn lets you network, and even TikTok lets you network, things like that. And YouTube lets you network in a, almost like a training platform. But that's kind of the typical two things I do is I just follow the funding, and I follow some of you see the trends with some of where some people are going. You just have to listen to it a little more than maybe the next person.
Have you had any failures in this area?
With the I've had failures where I didn't listen to my instinct, and it was, and I. So, are you familiar with the company Box? You know what Box is, right? Box.
What do they do?
So it's like Dropbox. Box is like
of course, yeah. Right? I mean, Box.
So Box was a recruiting client of mine when they had something like 25 employees, right? Yeah. And we had placed a candidate for them, right? So I think the fee was like $25,000. They gave us a choice. They had a ton of funding going on. They were about to get a ton of funding. They gave us a choice for the $25,000. They said, "Listen, we can pay you a check now, or we can just give you, RSUs, right? So stock, okay? Yeah. What do you want to do?" I took the check, right, which is a mistake. That $25,000 now would be worth, way more. So that's a mistake that I made. I haven't actually talked about that in a long time. I hadn't thought about that. The other mistake I made was, and this is just a networking problem. I had a company as a client, right? And the two founders. Have you ever heard of Stumble Upon? You know that company?
No. What do they do?
So Stumble Upon was this website. Okay, I don't even know if they exist anymore, but they were a website that it would sort of just, based on your needs and wants, it would automatically show you content that was relevant to you, right? So it's like, okay, it doesn't seem like a big deal. the founders, the two founders are the guys that founded Uber, right?
Right.
So yeah. So they later on, they flipped I think they sold StumbleUpon, then they founded Uber later on. But that was a mistake where I didn't really develop any of that relationship, right? When I could have, and I didn't. And that's the second mistake that I've made as well. I mean, I haven't thought about that, but that's another. It's just, sometimes the mistake is not a financial mistake, but it's a relationship mistake, right? Where you just didn't develop the relationship, where you didn't add enough value, let's say,
yeah,
where they thought of you when they did their next thing. So I think that was many moons ago, but I'd say those are the two main, just from a tech standpoint, where I made a mistake. The third failure where I missed trends was in 2008, 2009, when I built up a business to about 50 people. All my clients were financial institutions and banks, and one day I lost all of my clients. So I mean, literally, in like period of 48 hours. I don't know. Have we ever talked about that story before?
Yeah, we have. I remember the last time, and
okay.
It talks very importantly about diversifying your business and
the portfolio. Yeah. Exactly, and types of clientele. And that's the third mistake that I've made that I probably, I think initially it was a regret, but it's helped me build businesses. Now we have, number one, we have a very diverse portfolio of clients, but we also have different income streams, right? Which is a lot of the, people that start out initially to have a business, they only have one income stream, and it's a mistake, and you'll see that the ones that do really well have multiple sources of revenue.
So as myself as an entrepreneur, it's something that's been drilled into me listening to influencers and business people, that you need multiple streams of income. And I think it's, as you say, it's sometimes if they set up a business, if they set up a shop, they just sell things in their shop, but as we've seen in COVID, the whole point of online business and e-commerce has just completely boomed because people weren't allowed to leave their houses. So I definitely think multiple streams of income and just talk a little bit more about multiple. So for your business, so you're primarily in the recruiting business. How have you developed multiple streams of income within that business?
Right. So, and I think the idea is to take your core expertise, right, and then just divide it up. And, there's things you can sell, right? So, I mean, take an example like Apple, right? So they sell phones, right? Yeah. They also sell storage, right? And they've got the store. I mean, they've got, and they've got music, and they've got TV, and I think they're, I don't know if I heard this correctly, but I think they're just the music division alone does more than, like 95% of all Fortune 500s. I think that's if they were divided. It's something, I might be confusing one of their business lines. But on our side, so our expertise, right, is executive placement, right? So we're dealing with people that are making from $300,000 a year to $4 to $5 million a year. And that's the core expertise. So then, that's an 8-figure business. Okay. We then started a 7-figure business, which obviously every business starts at zero, but it turned into a 7-figure business on the branding side. So executive branding for those same types of people. Right. So, it's they're the common denominator when they hire us is well, your firm understands executive recruiting. So it makes sense for us to hire you on the branding side. The third line is we also coach those people. So we have a coaching line as well, right? The fourth line is the brand, going back to the branding. It's a B2B play. So we're actually doing corporate teams for the branding. So you have one cohesive message, right? So, but the whole, the base of it is recruiting, right? And executive leadership and recruiting. So I think if you're a business owner or an entrepreneur, being able to have some, quote unquote subdivisions is a really important play for people. But it's, if I were to sell, if I started my 6th business of restaurant, restaurant supplies, that would be pretty tough for me. Right. But maybe it would be, working with CEOs from franchise businesses and helping them better tell their personal brand. That would make more sense for somebody like, myself or my firm. But I think you need to stick with kind of what you know, right? So, when you branch off the things that you don't know, that's when you kind of get in trouble, and your experience or lack of experience, does you a disservice, right? So that's kind of what we've done. So a lot of people can do that, right? You can think about what is your core skill set, and this is what I did, by the way.
Yeah.
I wrote down, what are people paying me for and paying my firm for? They're paying me for executive recruiting, and then I wrote down a list. Okay, what do I exactly do in a day, right? And I had a notebook where literally it was for a month. I would just write down things I would do, right? So we would coach people in interview techniques. We would negotiate salaries. We would fix the resume or the CV. We would give them advice on LinkedIn. We would help them with a job search strategy, right? We wrote all of these things down, and then we just started packaging as another service. And everybody who has a business can do that.
And so one of the things I'm keen on and promote to my listeners is to have a side hustle. And I know it's slightly different as you own a large company, but what do you have sort of something in the pipeline maybe now, or do you usually try and diversify with another product? You talked about that you're a recruiter, you're branding, you talk about B2B branding, B2C. So is there always something that you're thinking about as your sort of next in the pipeline?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, I'm Alex, the host of X Health Show. Meet the future of healthcare. Think X-Men, that's X Health. Actual superheroes behind programming living cells to cure cancer once and for all. Tech that detects preterm delivery in seconds, brain-computer interface, or apps that employ AI to match you, your disease, with the best treatment. X Health Show brings to you visionaries who push the boundaries of healthcare from Switzerland, the heart of Europe and the most innovative country in the world. Let me introduce you to their startups. Head to X Health Show, meet the future of healthcare. Happy to greet you there.
I'd say yes. It's always, I think you have to get the systems down and get things working, let's say to some extent, they have to be working well.
Yeah.
And then we move on to the next thing. But there are other industries. To give you our next play is going to be, we're also looking at real estate deals as well. Okay.
Yeah.
The reason real estate deals make sense for us as a company is because we're in the recruiting business, right? Where we find opportunities, we find people, we put those two things together and we make money off of that, right? So we profit off of that. And real estate, to some extent, there's sort of a lot of common denominators between what we already do and real estate. So we're looking at diversifying into other things as well. But it goes to the core strength, right? It goes to the core strength of being able to find people and being able to put two people together. So we're looking at that as well. But we test everything. I'm like you. To me, everything starts as a little, side hustle, and it's really basic. Like, can I make $1,000 a month on this or $2,000 a month on this? And that's how I see it. And if I can, and then you just figure out how to scale it. And the branding business was literally, the idea was just to literally make $1,000 a month on that. That's the 7-figure business. And I just wanted to see if it would work. And then it just kind of takes off, once it does.
And have you ever bought or acquired a company in your growth strategy?
Not yet. But it's a great question. I actually, you're the first person ever to ask me that. The plan that we have for the branding part of the business is because our processes and our back end is pretty strong. We're going to start doing that in the next couple of years, right? Where there's a lot of people that maybe they've got like these two to 5 person companies, and they're not really doing well, and they're just barely paying the bills. But they have let's say they have a strong SEO, presence, or they drive a lot of traffic. We're about to start to do that, the next couple of years. So it's a great question. The other thing, which we also as a business, which is kind of related to the recruiting company, is we've talked about, almost from a private equity standpoint, putting a buyer and a seller together, right? And then getting a piece of that and some points on that. as well, because it's all, it's the same skill set as recruiting, right? Which it's just it's a different element. But at the end of the day, you're putting two parties together, and if they win, and then usually you can win as well. But it's a great question. We're going to start buying companies later on, where I think they're not operated as well. But it's a great, to me it seems like a cool chapter, like a next chapter for my businesses. Yeah, it's fun too. I mean, I don't know, that's something, talking about this, by the way. So I've never done that before. So I can either, this goes into lines of like getting coaches and paying people for their expertise.
Yeah.
I could either figure it out by myself, lose a ton of money, where I could hire people that have already done this, over and over and over successfully.
Yeah.
And, when we decide to do this, I'm going to, there's 100%, I'm going to pay, we're going to pay folks and hire a team to figure this out, right? People that have already successfully, done this, right? So
what I'll do off the podcast, I'll give you someone that I've interviewed who does this day in, day out. I'm not sure where she's based in the US, but I'm happy to link you two together, because she was a fascinating guest and basically did acquisitions.
That'd be wonderful. I appreciate that.
Yeah, let's do that offline. So what is your so one of the key things that people say is people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. So what's your 1 year plan and what's your 10-year plan?
Ooh, that's a great way. So financially or personally or in what sense?
I'm happy for you to talk about whatever area you want to.
Yeah, I mean, so personally, I've got these crazy, I've got this, I've got this one goal of I'm going to start taking flying lessons, right? So that's a personal thing.
Yeah.
I was getting a quote from a life insurance agent for term life insurance.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that they had asked was, they're trying to figure out risk, right?
Yeah.
And saying, have you ever, are you currently have you ever flown, like a plane before? Or are you currently a pilot? And the answer was no, but that triggered something in me that I thought this could be really interesting, right? So I'm gonna start doing that on a personal standpoint. Eventually, on a personal standpoint, I'd like to run. I've never run. I do these ultra marathons.
Yep.
I've never done a 100-miler. I've only done. I'd say only done, but the distance I've done is 80K, which is 50 milers.
Yep.
And so I'd like to eventually. I don't know if I'll do it this year, but I'd like to accomplish the 100-miler. In the next couple of years. That's on my plate. From a professional standpoint, we've got 30 people. I'd love to triple. I like to have 100 people. It's like this mental, thing to say you have 100 people on your team, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm always figuring out new ways to do that. So that's I'd like to be, I'd like to go from 30 to 50 people the next year on the company side. But eventually I'd like to be at least 100 people. And then in 10 years, I don't know. My plan is I'll probably sell some of my businesses, in 10 years I'll be 55, but I don't know. I'll be 55, but so now I'm 45, but I feel like I'm 25 or 30. I feel I have so much energy. 10 years is a long time out, right? Like six months for me is a long time out for some of these things. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually inspired by something Grant Cardone, and I know we spoke that you're involved with him as well. Is that whole point that you whatever stage of your life you're in, you still need to dream big, and whether it's a personal or whether it's a professional thing, I think you should always think of that sort of 10-year plan of whether it's a professional. Because I'm fascinated by your ultra marathon. So you got into them relatively late on, didn't you?
No, I did, and I had never run. The farthest distance I had ever run was a half marathon, right? So 21 kilometers before ever even running. My first ultra marathon, the 50 miler, for example, that I'd run, I had never actually ran a marathon, right? So I went from 21K to 80K, right? So and you talk about mindset, right? You talk about a couple of runners who were marathon runners had told me, hey, George, that's pretty much impossible, Like you can't do that. There's a process you have to respect. And, and my question or my response back to them was, or my question, was, well, how many ultra marathons have you run? Like they've run, it was pretty much zero. And I thought, okay, well, this, the source of the information is not great. And I decided to do it, and I trained, and I did it, right? And but I'd run a bunch of ultras before ever running a marathon, right? So you bring up a really, really important point, and it's about dreaming and dreaming big. I was at a party years ago where somebody had said to me at a party, like, "Hey George, you're too much of a dreamer, like you're just a dreamer." That's what somebody had told me at a party. And
how old were you then?
I'm sorry.
How old were you when they said
that?
This
is about 10 years ago. Yeah. So I was 35, right? I was 35. And I was talking about, I was just talking about things that I wanted to do and other things. And they were just, I think it was my overall presence of just the way I talk about things, and like, oh, you're too much of a dreamer, my response was, it's like, well, listen, either I'm like, if I don't dream for myself, who's going to dream for me? Like no one, right? So that's a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people get shut down when somebody else tells them, hey, you think too big, or you dream too much, or hey, you can't afford that, or it's too expensive, or you shouldn't buy that, or hey, you shouldn't, you can't hire that person, or this person's too impossible to get in touch with. That's somebody else's belief system, and the problem comes about when you start believing them, right? I mean, it's and then that's when you start to get crippled. So I just never ever really listened to anybody when they told me I couldn't do something, So it's and maybe they're right. Maybe I can do something, but at least I try.
Absolutely.
And but if you don't believe and dream in yourself, and if you don't think you're smart, or if you don't think you're able to do something, like no one else will for you, right? So that's the first thing. That's the first thing I would say. For if you don't think that your business is going to be successful, then it won't, right? Because you don't need other people to tell you that your business will be successful, that you're starting out, or you've seen that over and over, right? Through you've got some great work experience as well.
Yeah.
You have two types of people, right? You have the person that is just this, almost like this hopeless romantic, and then you have the other person that just is so down and negative about everything. And then a lot of those things live out, they play themselves out. But that's, listen, I think dreaming big is cool. Like, I don't know. I think it's like, you need to wake up in the morning excited about stuff, and what's the other version of that? Just like, mediocre, being mediocre and conforming to what people have told you you're supposed to do. And I don't know, it just seems really boring to me.
So I've got two streams that I want to talk about. And the first stream is, so you said that you're a dreamer, you dream big, do you think, because a lot of people that when I'm coaching people and they say, oh, I don't think I can do this, I can't build a business, I can't start a business. Often it's their parents or very close family members that are that sort of voice in their head. Would you say that your upbringing gave you those skills, or did you learn them while you were an adult?
Right. No, I think I learned. I think you can also learn. And this is not. Listen, it's not a knock on. So the school, like the university system, for example, at Oxford. So I think you'd seen. I went to New College, right?
Yeah. And
as an American, when you study in a different country, especially at some of these universities, like the Oxfords or the Cambridges of the world, you can. There's some things you can learn, right? And then there's some things you can learn how not to. You can learn how not to be, right? And some of my greatest lessons quite frankly, at Oxford were how not to behave, right? And which those are great lessons, right? Because there is a sort of there's I think so you can there's two takeaways always. But at home, I was taught at home. I was taught, okay, if you go to school, if you go to good schools, and and you get a job, and you're gonna hang out at that job for 30 years, 40 years, and then you'll retire. That's what I was taught, right? Mm-hmm. I wasn't taught to take risk. I wasn't taught to I wasn't taught to like go for it. I wasn't taught to think big. I was taught if the store says that it opens up at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then it opens at 9 o'clock in the morning. If the store closes at 5 p.m., then that's when it closes, right? Like you shouldn't, and then I've got this, so I wasn't taught that. I learned that, unfortunately, being unemployed, right? So I was on this unemployment line, and I was sort of thinking about everything I had done. I thought, okay, I went to some great schools and great universities, and I worked at these kind of, prestigious pedigree companies, and I'm still unemployed, right? And it was just, you get to a point where you say, okay, I've done it their way. Let me try it my way, right? And my way turned out to be, in my opinion, a better way, and just with more freedom and time, and I control exactly what I do in a day. So it's a lesson. I think it's a problem with the educational system as well, right? I mean, you were taught the same thing, right? Go to school, get a job, work at a great company, right?
My parents taught me get a job with a corporate, spend 40 years with them, do well, progress, get to where you want to be, and then retire and enjoy your retirement. And actually, one of the big catalysts for me changing or starting to frame my world differently was that my father passed away at 61 or 62, and he never got to retirement age.
Wow.
And that for me was a massive shift, because he talked about all of my life, that he was going to enjoy his retirement. It was going to be amazing. He was going to do this and he was going to do that. He was an artist. He loved drawing and painting, and he wanted to do this in the countryside with my wife. And he passed away. I think it was 62. He passed away, and he never got there. And suddenly, for me, that was a big shift in my mind, because suddenly it was like, well, what I've been taught all my life, he couldn't achieve now, whether it was bad genes or lifestyle.
Right.
There are contributing factors, but that for me was a massive sea change, and started me thinking wider, and made me get into sort of self-development and sort of personal development, and for me that's been a massive inspiration, and the way I've changed my life. But yeah, I was taught exactly the same. You get a good steady job, you do really well, you go up the ladder, get to where you want to be, and then retire and enjoy it. So
right. And then you're too, I mean, quite frankly, your back hurts, you can't sleep, you're on this medication, that medication. I mean, it's like you're better off enjoying it, right, in your 30s, 40s, 50s, right, when you're healthy enough to be able to. I totally agree. I had this conversation with my wife, and we talked about, she's not a fan of me doing the flying lessons, right? The plane, but I commented. I made a comment to her. I said, listen, like at the end of the day, like I don't want to be 75, 80 years old and say I should have done that, could have done that. I just don't want to have that kind of life, right? And but I then made the comment saying, like, God forbid anything ever happens to me, like do not feel bad for me, because honestly I had a great life. I've done more sometimes in like 40 some. I mean, even at the age of like 25, I've done more. Age 30, I've done more. But I've done more than, like, I've had a pretty good life, right? So it's cool to know that you can appreciate that. Some people, like I said, are just waiting for the retirement. Yeah. My dad worked at the same place for 35 years. And like it's like just to be able to sit home and like I don't really see a lot of benefit to that, right? Like you work just to be able to get, and he's still afraid sometimes of risk, right? Like he's afraid of risk, and I don't see it that way. I tell you, this is I mean, I've got great parents, but I'll tell you, my mom has dementia, so we live right across the street from them. Right. But I'll tell you this is a true story. Happened 3 weeks ago with them. My dad, they've got accumulated stuff in their house, right? Mm-hmm. They've been in the house for 40 something years, 50 years. Yeah. And I made a comment to my dad. I said, hey Dad, I've got a great idea for you. You can even make some money on it, right? And he said, I'm not interested. He said, I'm not interested before I said anything else. Right. I didn't even finish the sentence. I'm not interested. So then I kind of said, well, let me finish what I'm going to say. You have all this junk, why don't you sell it on, get my kid, or we've got a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, but get the 9-year-old to take pictures and have him sell this stuff online. Right. With all these apps, it's pretty easy. You can take the money and you can use it, give my kid 10% and you keep 90 and he does all, and it's a good little project. But initially he wasn't even open. He wasn't open to that. Right. Like it was a no. Right. And then later on, I think like a week or two had gone by, then he was sort of open to the idea, but there's a lot of people that live a life where they're just not open to anything, because it's not, he was like, well, how do you know that people are going to not, like, they're going to know where you live? Is it safe? It was all these negatives about why you shouldn't do it rather than why you should. And a lot of people live that, and that's how I was brought up that way. I was brought up to, like, you follow the rules and you keep your mouth shut and you close the door, that's what you do. Right. So I don't know, I think we need that. Like, we need people to think sometimes like that as a business person. Like, I need corporations to work. I need people to think that way. But if you're an entrepreneur, it's a death sentence, right? Once you get into it, you'll see too, once you start, it's as an entrepreneur, you get sucked into, like, quite frankly, I've been unemployed for 20 years. If you think about it, right? I've had my own business for 20 years, but, I wouldn't change it anyway. Like, I would not, knock on wood, but I would not go back to work for somebody ever.
And why do you think you were happy with risk taking? Because as an entrepreneur, you have to take risks, whether it's starting a business, scaling a business, whether it's acquiring a business. How has your appetite to risk? Has it changed? Has it? Are you very much open to taking risks at this stage of your life?
I mean, I would say it hasn't. I'd say it's actually probably increased, right? I mean, it hasn't. It's changed. I take more risks now than I did before. I had this conversation with someone in my team. He runs my team, right? And we talked about pay, right? And we literally had this conversation about. We're talking about one of my businesses. The third business, I've kind of cut myself off on the pay because I'm kind of like, okay, I've made enough money on that. Let's stop paying me on this one, and let's take the money and use it for marketing. And he made a comment about, he's like, George, for the amount of hours you're working on it, which is pretty. He's making a comment about the lack of hours. You're making quite a lot of money per hour. And I made the comment, which is true, right? It's just, I just take more risk, right? So I'm getting paid, I'm getting reimbursed for my risk, right? For my appetite for risk. So, if somebody makes, if you work for somebody, and this is the negative, I think this is the danger, or this is the fear of entrepreneurs, is that if I start a business, will it work, right? The true reality of having a business is that, and this is like, so Mark, you get paid exactly to the penny what you're worth as a business owner, like to the penny, right? So there's none of this like, oh, I work so hard, I'm underpaid. You hear that at corporate all the time, right? Yeah, I work really hard. I'm paid $20,000 less or 20,000 pounds, short of what I should be. The market says this. As a business owner, you literally get paid to the penny what you're worth. And that's what I love about entrepreneurialism, and I love about risk, right? So, maybe this year I made more than last, but that was a fair pay scale for what I did, or what the risk I took or the risk I didn't take. And I think it's just a cool thing, right? I don't see having a business, so like, you work, so if you work for a company, if you do an awesome job, they give you a 5% bonus. Maybe they give you a 20% bonus, right? If you don't do an awesome job, they send you to the street, right? If I have a business and I do an awesome job, you'd hope I make more than 20% as a bonus, right? So financially, it's much more lucrative. Yeah. If I don't do an awesome job, I'm still in the street. Like, I have the same problem as the guy who works for a company who doesn't do a great job, right? The the problem with the employee is that the employee sometimes gets the coast, right? They get to hide behind sort of boxes, and you've seen a lot in like the coronavirus, I mean, COVID-19, there's a lot of people getting let go. A lot of them are people that just, they initially didn't, they're, some of their errors are getting exposed now, right? So that's what I love about entrepreneurialism and taking risk and having businesses, and you get paid literally to the penny what you're worth. And I think that's, for some it's like a frightening thing because that's the reality of the situation. But for others, I think it's a cool thing to know. What I make today might not be what I make tomorrow, right? And I love that. I love that back and forth. I think it's a cool. I'm intrigued by how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's just move a little bit onto mindset. So we were talking earlier on about your mindset to be able to run an ultra marathon, and I always describe myself as a pragmatic optimist. So I'm definitely on the optimist side, but I like to think that I have I'm not naive. I understand whether it's in a corporate, I understand the politics or the relationships, but I will want to see the positive in people or the business or what you're delivering. If you were to phrase your mindset in 2 or 3 words, what would you say to that?
Oh, that's a tough question. How would I frame? I would say I'm probably. I mean, I think I have to use the word optimist because I feel that way. I would say I'm probably an engaged optimist, right? Pragmatic, but I think I'm probably pragmatic as well. I mean, I also think about so I take risk, but this is important to mention. I test a lot of things, right? So I have a lot of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H kind of scenarios.
Yeah.
If this happens, then do this, or if this happens, let's test that. There's a great quote, and I don't remember. I'm going to say this wrong, but it's from an economist that talks about, and I think you've heard this before, but talks about there's the bikini analogy. Have you heard that one about the bikini, about the statistics? Have you ever heard that quote?
Yeah, I think I have. Go on. How does it go?
So I think and I'm paraphrasing this, but it's statistics are like a bikini, right? The hidden is vital, right? So I guess from a business standpoint, I'm probably I'm an engaged optimist. But when I say engaged, I'm looking at. So they tell me there's a 10%. I mean, the weather report's a great example. 10% chance of rain, right? I see that as, when I see those things, I see it as a 90% chance that it won't rain, right? 90% chance of cloudy or maybe sun. But you have to understand both of those numbers, right? There's a 10% chance of rain. There's also a 90% chance that it won't rain. So so I'd probably call myself or classify myself an engaged optimist, but. As a business, I like to test these things, right? So I like to look at the things that somebody didn't tell me, or the stats that didn't come out, or it's you see that everywhere, right? I mean, you see it in weather reports, you see it in earnings reports, you see it in like the economy, 30% unemployment, right? Well, that means that 70% of the people are working, right? So. So you have to. I think a lot of the people they just see the 10% as the weather report as it might rain, rather than seeing the other part, which is the 90% that it won't rain. So I think engaged optimist. I could probably steal pragmatic optimist. It probably goes in line with how you think as well, right? But I'm a fan of. I think people have a lot of potential, and I like seeing that talent, and getting that talent from them before sometimes they recognize it in themselves, right? I think I've done really well in that sense as well.
So what is more important to you, your employees or your clients?
I would say, I mean, I don't know. I think they're different. It's kind of like, who's more important? Is it your wife or your kid? You know what I mean? Like, who would you say first? I think they're both important. I think that I can tell you to speak about the employees. I see it this way. I mean, we have, for example, when somebody works on my team, you get your birthday off. You get unlimited vacation. That's how we have it set up, right? And why would you give somebody unlimited vacation? Because you hope that when you hire somebody and they work with you, that they're going to be responsible, right, in how they deal with their time. But there's 7 billion people on this planet. I don't know if there's more now, but I think there's probably 7 billion plus. But the fact that these 29 people, I say 30 people on my team, I'm number 30, but these 29 people decide to wake up every day and hang out with me, that's a cool thing. So I'm very appreciative of that. I'm also appreciative of they treat this as if it's their business, so and that's kind of, I think it's tough for me to answer. The other thing is the clients. The clients are really important. A prospect is important, right? A lead is important. A referral is important. Anybody that is kind of in your universe is important. A vendor is important. You have to develop those relationships as well. But I would reckon that everything comes full circle, and you need to be able to treat people really, really well and sleep well at night to have a successful sort of employee base as well as a client base.
Yeah. It's a bit of a tricky question. The reason why I asked is I think it was Richard Branson said that his employees are the most important thing to his business because they will look after my clients. And I thought that was quite powerful for me, because everyone, predominantly you get people say, well, obviously it's your clients, they're paying your bills, they're bringing the business in, but actually your employees are really important, and they shouldn't be treated badly, and they should be empowered, and they should be lifted up, because they're the people that are going to be your brand, they're going to be your business, they're going to sit in front and talk to your clients and stuff. So I suppose I had a particular angle on that one. It's only because I find it really interesting, because most people will say clients and actually forget the importance of employees as well.
Right. Well, I can tell you, I think it's, I would argue, I think I asked that question to somebody that has more than 3 employees, and I'll probably tell you they're probably going to answer employees. It's almost the same way I did, right? You get to a point. Where you think it's like your employees. When I went from 50 in 2009, I went from 50 people to 0. Right, I had to pretty much let everyone go. I did, well, pretty much. I did. That was more difficult for me than losing my clients, right? So. It was like breaking up with a girlfriend. I was like distraught by it. I was losing sleep over it, right? And they, like you said, they are your ambassadors, with the clients. But you need clients to run a business, obviously, as well. But I think it's a great way to think. The best employees, by the way, are the ones that treat it like their own business, right? So those are the best. Those are the best employees as well. I've been blessed that from what I know, it feels this way, but all the people that work on our team, they treat it like their own business, which is a cool problem to have for us, right? So, yeah.
Just on where in 08, 09, when you struggled with the banks as your clients, did you obviously must have gone through some periods of doubt and probably guilt, maybe, but just to tap into that slightly, did you ever not think you were going to bounce back? Did you ever feel that it was too hard to start again, or did you feel obviously you went through a period of that, but then you came back and you went, well, actually I'm going to build this business better and bigger and stronger? How was your thought process going through all of that in 08, 09?
I think by then I was so brainwashed with, I can't, and obviously it was some of the problems that I made, it wasn't due to, because I had, I only had just one type of client, right? It was also, there are other problems that were created because of just the way I was personally, right? Or the way I spent money, right? And I think I knew that. I mean, I was making like $1 million, you know, I mean, our company was doing more, but I was making personally like $1 million a year, and I was spending like 1.2, right? You know, so, you know, it's like I instinctively knew that, right? I knew that was a problem, you know, and I knew, so that gave me a little bit of confidence. You know, there were things that I could easily fix, right, the next time around. By the way, to be fair, this is not, I don't think I mean, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but not many. I lost 2 houses, by the way, because I was just so over leveraged, right? That, so I mean, besides losing a business, I also lost 2 houses, right? So it's like, it couldn't get any worse, you know, which was also a positive for me, you know, like you're already at 0, maybe you're at 1. And I just thought, okay, well, I was smart enough, or I was kind of astute enough to figure out how to get to this point. Let me just try it again. I don't know. I never really thought that I couldn't do it again. You know, but I was also brainwashed with the benefits of being able to build your own business and run your own ideas and not have meetings about meetings and not have to wear a suit and tie sometimes, right? Like, it was just, there's so many things that are positive. To work, I don't know, to go home early or to work late, and you didn't have to feel bad or fake it. You didn't have to like stay there to 5 o'clock at night to pretend like you were working. You know, you could just leave at 4 if you wanted to, or you could leave at 10 o'clock at night. It doesn't, you know, you didn't have to fake anything. I thought that was really a cool thing, and it was really hard for me to go back to work for somebody else. I didn't know if I was going to stay in recruiting, right?
Okay.
But I did know. I was like, okay, I have decent people skills, I have decent contacts. It just, everything, you know, kind of like, it just led to recruiting, right? And I just stuck with it, and eventually, you know, it paid for itself, and like, we've done much better now than we were doing back then. So, and financially, you know, I'm wiser with my money.
Yes, and I think personal finance is incredibly important. I know we spoke after the first interview that you're using Rami Satish, is it?
Rami Sethi, the sync account idea, right?
Yeah. It's
and
incredibly powerful. It's a really good.
Well, maybe we could talk about this from the business. Like, if you're a business owner, maybe this would be interesting, because we run our business that way too. Right. Do you mind if I talk about that?
Go for it. Yeah.
So there's a guy, his name is Rami Sethi. I might be pronouncing his name wrong, but he didn't invent the concept, but he talks about sync accounts, where you pretty much pre-plan for certain things that might happen, and you have these little bank accounts, like savings accounts. Yeah. You can have it in one account, and then you can sort of just disperse the money on a spreadsheet, let's say. But we have these. You know, from a personal standpoint, I have a mistake account, right? So for any mistakes I make, or I have a flex account. So if there's like a birthday, you know, kids' birthday parties where I need to spend $100 on a gift, we have a deductible account, right? So for my wife's car, you know, the deductible is like $2,000, and mine's $2,000. So if we have to pay a deductible for an insurance claim, you know, we've got the money in that account. We've got a pet account, so if the pet gets sick. But you could do this with your business, right? So we actually use these type of accounts because of COVID-19, right? So my recruiting business obviously was on pause from March to it started to tick up again. But we use these accidental kind of emergency accounts to be able to fund some of the recruiting the last couple of months. And so it's called sync accounts, right? It's just SINK. That's the overall name of it. But it's a blessing to know that you have money in the bank for that next emergency, you know. And it doesn't ruin your day. Yesterday I got a parking ticket, overnight parking. Cost me $35 because I forgot I'd fallen asleep a little early, and then I guess they did a street cleaning, and I got a ticket the next day, right, for $35, right? And you know, I already saved for that. I've got, like, you know, a little account for I don't get many parking tickets, but you know, it didn't ruin my day that I got a $35 ticket, right? So it's kind of an interesting concept, but we use it for our business. It's been a powerful tool. It's really simple, but it's nice to have that sort of emergency account money, you know, stocked away.
And in this period of COVID, where recessions or downturns are definitely happening, to have an amount of cash reserve available to be able to keep on paying the employees or keep your marketing up or whatever it is to get strength coming out of it. Just having a cash reserve is still so important for businesses.
Well, it's a peace of mind, right? It's a peace of mind. We have a house in Peru, right? I don't know if I mentioned that to you, but I've got a house in Lima, in this place called Miraflores, which is like the Pacific coast. It's beautiful. It looks at the ocean. Yeah. So we have health insurance here in the United States, right? So we don't have health insurance. And I had, just very stupidly, I didn't buy one of these travel insurance policies. My 9-year-old, this is last summer, the day before we were supposed to leave, right? To come back here to the States, his appendix burst, right? Or was about to burst, right? So he needed an operation. So he's stuck in hospital, right? And, in South America and some of these emerging market countries, at a private clinic, it was the British American Hospital. They won't touch somebody unless they get paid, up front for it, and then they can worry about the insurance piece later, right? So, it's not like other places where because of an emergency. And they need pretty much to do anything. They needed $6,000, right? So, that's money that technically that would ruin a lot of people's sort of vacation, right, or holiday. Yeah. Because you're not ready for that. Like that wasn't. We were more focused on my kid than the money. Yeah. And that's the peace of mind that those things and you don't need to save $6,000 in one shot. You can save $500 a month for whatever, but there's a peace of mind having those emergency accounts. And that's a real life example of later on. So later on, the insurance company here reimbursed us. It took them like 11 months to get the money back to us, right? But I'm also not for 12 months. I'm also not waiting, for that money, and I'm not hanging on to. It's not crippling the rest of my life, right? It's more of an afterthought, and that's the nice thing about having these sync accounts. But for a business, right? For a business, exactly what you talk about. You have these growth periods, or maybe you take on the wrong client where you lose money, right? Or you do Facebook advertising and it didn't work. You're able to mitigate some of the risk.
Yeah. And so how much time do you spend in Peru?
Yeah, so it depends. I mean, I try to go in my version of our version of the winter, which is summertime there. Right. So now I don't know. Now it's a couple weeks a year. My kids usually go for the summer, but this year I was supposed to be actually living in Italy. We're working on getting the EU citizenship, right? So I've got, because of my great grandparents, I'm eligible for the Italian citizenship, but a couple weeks a year, my kids are there more. Have you been to Peru before?
No, I haven't. I've seen the coast on South America, and it looks spectacular. It looks amazing.
The food. I mean, if you were to look this up, I think last year top 10 restaurants in the world. I forget what it depends on what source, but 2 of them were in the town where we have a place, right? The food there is just, amazing. To give you an idea, our place that we have there, we don't have, we don't own a microwave. We don't own a can opener, right? The fridge is pretty bare, right? Because we just buy fresh food. It's just the food. It's just terrific. Like the food culture, Peruvian food culture, really, really, really solid. But people, really nice people. The weather's decent. Some Machu Picchu and Cusco's cool. That's one of the 7 wonders of the world. Yeah. If you haven't been, it's a cool place to visit.
Oh, maybe I will. So on our last conversation, you talked about Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Right.
Tell me about a couple of other books that you would recommend to business owners or entrepreneurs, either from a mindset point of view or a finance point of view. Just whichever ones you think.
Right, from a book standpoint, that's great. I'm listening to this, and it's not, not because I'm not. It's just I think it's a decent book. It's actually a Cardone book. If you're not last, if you're not first, you're last. Right, that's an interesting book. Yeah. Which talks about it's actually relevant to the COVID-19 about getting back into the marketplace, and pretty much how to build a business with your current contact base. I think that's an interesting read. I'm a huge fan of the 4-Hour Workweek and then also the E-Myth Revisited 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss.
Yep.
Which is it's dated obviously, but and the other book is the E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. I don't know if you've read that book, but
is that one good? It's one of those that's been on my bucket list for a long time, and I've not got around to.
My business is actually based on those two books. If you combine those two books, that's sort of what my business models are. My business models are based on those two books, actually. Wow. I think it's called the E-Myth Revisited: Why Most Small Businesses Fail. I think it's one of the most sold books as well. You should totally the audio. I mean, the audio book is pretty easy to listen to. I think it's an Audible. That's a great book that I recommend. There's an app. I don't know have you tried Blinkist? Have you tried that app?
No, I've not. And I'm a little bit old school with my book, because I consume now on Audible more than reading these days. And I write notes. I do it on Evernote.
Okay.
To make notes while I'm reading. But I've heard now from a couple of people who are like, Blinkist is so good that it encapsulates everything in 15 minutes. It's an interesting concept, but I'm worried you're going to miss some of the important points that Blinkist don't consider important.
Right. What I've done is like with Blinkist, what I've done is I think it's like $90 a year. It might be 90 pounds. I don't know how they price it in the UK, but what I've done is, I use it as a precursor to. So I'm like you. I like audiobooks. I think it's just easier, especially with sometimes my attention span isn't great. But I'll listen. I'll do the Blinkist thing for 9 minutes. I'll listen to it, and if it's intriguing, then I'll listen to the whole audiobook. Right. So that's actually. That's actually how I got into the Grant Cardone book. I heard it on Blinkist first, and then I thought, okay, well let me do the audiobook and listen to the audiobook. So that's what I think it's for $90. It's just great for me. It's like if you're commuting and you've got a 9-minute commute or a 10-minute commute, you can pretty much listen to 2 books, or at least it's the equivalent of, if like, okay, so, hey Mark, what's your favorite book? Talk about it for 10 minutes. Tell me what it's about. Right. And that's kind of the equivalent, but then it makes it's kind of a segue for you to buy the book or not buy the book sometimes. And that's how I use that. But I know people that literally, they quote unquote listen to the cliff notes, right, of a couple books a week just based on that. My goal, by the way, is to, and I think did you interview? I think I sent you. Did you interview Magda Khalifa?
Yes.
So she's a friend of mine. Her and I grew up in the same town, actually. I don't know if she mentioned that to you. I read her book called American Dream.
Yes.
I don't know if you've read that book, but it's have you read that book?
No, I've not. She was a fascinating guest. It was.
I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna buy that book for you. I'm gonna send it to you. Okay, the actual book.
Oh,
yeah. It's like, it's kind of like being in a movie and you're hanging out in Iraq with a female, military person, and she's telling you what it's like, right? Mm-hmm. And the book, it's an easy read. But I'm going to send that book to you, I'll send it to you so you get the book. And I just finished that book. Every Sunday night I would read the book. That's a cool book to read too, but it talks about, there's an acronym there with dream. Her book's called American Dream, but it just talks about resilience and how, just do like living living the life that you want to live, and things you need to do. She was like, okay, 9/11 happens. I'm going to join the military and do my thing. And everybody's like, are you crazy? Like, you have a job? Like, what, are you nuts? Yeah. And she just dropped everything. She was married, and she became and she jumped into the military. It's just an amazing story. But that was a really fascinating book I'm going to send that to you, and you can tell me your thoughts on that, after you read it.
So we're coming towards the end of the podcast, and usually I have 5 questions I ask everyone, the same question. Obviously, I've asked you I've already asked you those questions. So I've got two questions. One is, do you have any questions for me? Obviously, we've chatted before. And the second question is, if there was one thing that we've not talked about on these two conversations that you have a burning desire to either tell my audience about, what would they be?
Right. So, so the first, actually, I have a very good question for you. I mean, so you're kind of on your entrepreneurial journey, right? And you've seen, you've seen kind of the struggles and some of the, the advantages of things as well, right? You've seen some of the pros and cons. How have you dealt with people that were negative, right? Or maybe they had a negative attitude towards your, your end game. And I'm just curious to see how you've dealt with those people.
So the people that are important to me that have been negative or have started from a negative point of view, I have tried to persuade them. And I've tried to persuade them sometimes with the power of my persuasion of an argument or a point that I've got. Some people, like for example, my wife was quite cynical about this property business, which I'm in the process of building. And I had to do a spreadsheet to be able to show her the numbers to make sure that it was going to make money. And I equally, I've got a contingency fund, and I had to demonstrate to her that the business was going to be profitable at this point, at X point of number of properties. And then afterwards, then we're in good shape, and we're doing various things like putting funds in different areas to if a boiler goes or something, I've got
right.
that I can cover that. So for her on the property, it was persuading her with numbers or with an argument. With people outside of my people that I acquaintances, let's say, that hear a story that I'm doing this or doing that with an entrepreneur side, and they don't approve or are negative about it. To be honest, I will try and persuade them if I'm in the pub having a chat with them or having a coffee with them and talking about it. But to be honest, if they're not converted to my point of view, then I pretty much just put it in a box and just go, well, when we meet again, I just won't talk about it. It just, right. I will just not dismiss their trail of thought, but if they're not convinced and they don't mean, if they're not significant in my life, then to be honest, I'm not going to waste my time broaching those subjects. We'll just talk about something else. We'll talk about
right.
Or
well, and you'll see too. I mean, some of those people you just kind of eliminate them from your from your day to day, right? Later,
it was so funny. One person, I was in the pub with, this was pre-COVID, with like 6 or 7 friends, and there was one guy in the pub, and I'm sure everyone has got one of these in their social network, and he was telling me all the things I should be doing with the properties and the money and the you should leverage, you should do this, you should do that, and I said to him, "How many properties have you got?" Well, I haven't got any. I just own my own property at home. And to be honest, like, there is always someone in your network who knows everything but has never done it.
Right.
And it was an interesting one, because I just thought, when we were talking in this group about it and he's telling me all these things that I should be doing, I just thought, you've got no practical experience at all. What even gives you the thought that you know enough to be able to advise me on it? But
right.
They're pretty interesting characters.
Well, it goes back to the example I gave about the marathon runners, right? Who advised me that you can't run an ultra if you haven't done a marathon, but they'd never run. Most of the people try to advise on things they really don't know much about, right? So that you'll see too later on. I mean, you're like, you're younger than me, but eventually those people you just won't waste your time. You just want to hang out with them, right? So it's you'll start, when you start getting another question of like, so tell me how you do it, or what's your secret, or tell me how. So when you start getting that, you're on to something, right? So The other thing, which I get now, I didn't get that before. It was, oh my God, you're so lucky. Like you can just do whatever you want on a Thursday, or you start getting those comments, that you're onto something really positive, right? So your question was, I guess you want to know two things about me that maybe your audience doesn't. I'd like the audience to know, right?
Yeah.
One. I mean, I guess. I don't know if this is a plug, but the first thing is, I think if someone's looking for help on the brand, right? So getting the LinkedIn together and maybe some of their marketing material, like a CV or a biography, or just, and it could be. It doesn't mean that you're a candidate. It could be. All of these tools are really, really important when you're running a business as well, because sometimes companies will say, well, can you send me something about yourself? All of this marketing material is really important as well. And it's also important if you meet somebody, if you meet somebody at the pub or you're on holiday and they go on Google and they look you up, right? It's important to be able to control some of that elevator pitch. So if anyone's looking for professional help on that, professional being you're going to have to pay for it, right? Yes. Then I think we're a good option. The second thing is this has been a byproduct of just some of the podcasts, but we've done quite a lot of partnerships with either some of the listeners or some people, or folks that have interviewed me, or 6 degrees of separation, from some of those parties. So if you're thinking about a partnership where we think someone like myself or my team might make sense, then we're open to that as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, George. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. We'll have to do a part 3 at some stage in the future as well.
We have to do it. I mean, we have to when the borders, we have to do a live one in London with a microphone at a pub, and we can do some sort of. We'll put some cameras up. We'll do that. That'd be cool. That
would be amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. When COVID gets released, do you travel a lot to the UK?
I mean, I haven't been for years, but I was planning on being there actually this summer, right? But as soon as I was in Europe last year. I was in Spain last year for like 3 weeks. I was in Barcelona for a while.
Oh, yeah.
But this year the plan was to be living in Italy, and then doing a couple of these weekend trips with the Ryanairs of the world, as soon as things open up, I'm going to be there pretty soon. Our place in Peru, the game plan eventually will be to sell it and then buy a similar place in Barcelona or someplace else in Europe, right? Awesome. So hopefully I'll be there much, much more than I am now. So I just think it's a great, there's so much culture there, and it's super fun. But I'd like to be, I have so many friends in the UK that I need to visit, and it's never. Listen, any excuse to go hang out in the UK is always a good excuse, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We can do a podcast, and then we can go for dinner or a couple of beers.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, lovely, George. Thank you so much for your time. And
Mark, appreciate it, my friend. Thank you.
Cheers.